I'd like to turn my microphone on and call to order the regularly scheduled meeting of the Apex Town Council. This is the April 17th, 2018 meeting. I'd like to invite you to join me for the invocation. Lord, we thank you for this opportunity to come here tonight and serve the people of Apex. We pray that you will give us the wisdom and guidance that we request and desire in order to do the best job we possibly can. We pray that we'll keep them in mind in all the things we discuss and decide tonight, for it is them that we serve. We thank you for those who have fought for our freedom overseas, who have sacrificed life, limb, family. We pray your comfort and guidance upon those families. We pray tonight that we will be able to serve with dignity and honor. We pray all these things in your holy name. Amen. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to welcome you all to the Apex Town Council meeting. I hope as you came in you saw the podium there to the right. It had a stapled agenda that looks like this. If you missed it, you may feel free to go get one now. Head out. I don't mind if you jump up and go get one whenever you want to. You'll follow along in the program. This is the agenda for tonight. Also, if you intend to speak tonight, there are two things that are colored yellow that you need to know about. One of them is the guideline sheet. That was also on the podium. So if you intend to speak, you need to follow these guidelines, familiarize yourself with them in the next several minutes. The other yellow thing is the sheet that's over on the ledge there. Mr. Roach is diligently signing in to one of those. Those are the sheets that we use to call people up when it's time for public hearings and the public forum time. If your name's not on the sheet, I won't be calling your name, so if you intend to speak, please sign in. That also puts your name and address with the correct spellings for the town clerk. With all that, I'd like now to turn to the presentations time. And presentation number one is the Think Apex Day Proclamation. Think Apex Day 2018 is this next Saturday, the 28th. So not this coming one, but the one after that. And Apex residents are encouraged to get out in the community and make a positive impact through various selfless actions and volunteerism for their community. At this time, I'd like to turn this over to Mayor Pro Tem Nicole Dozier. Oh, this? The proclamation?
Yes.
There we go. For the reading of the proclamation.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Proclamation, Think Apex Day 2018 from the Office of the Mayor. Whereas Think Apex was created in 2014 as an initiative to encourage a local mindset by all parts of the Apex community, including businesses, residents, and visitors. It encourages those in and around Apex to support and invest in the local and unique aspects of our community in order to create a stronger and more vibrant economic environment and the quality of life. By fostering a local mindset, Think Apex empowers the community to celebrate, engage, play, volunteer, shop, eat, and work locally. Whereas, to further this initiative, Think Apex Day was created as a day dedicated to giving back in the Apex community by volunteering in ways that will positively impact the town and the people who live here. Whereas, the inaugural Think Apex Day in 2017 was a resounding success with over 75 volunteers across 6 events and over 100 volunteer hours completed. Whereas, citizens can learn more at www.thinkapex.biz about Think Apex Day and register for multiple volunteer opportunities and activities. Whereas, citizens are also encouraged to create their own activity and share their efforts on social media using the hashtag PeakProud. Whereas, in addition to Think Apex Day, the 2018 Think Apex Awards will be presented on May 1st to recognize over 20 nominees and to reveal the winning top thinkers. Now, therefore, the Apex Town Council does hereby proclaim Saturday, April 28, 2018 as Think Apex Day in the town of Apex and encourages all citizens to consider some form of participation, either formal or otherwise, that will further enhance the commitment to our community and to one another as one of the best places to live in America. in witness thereof. Let me read the rest.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Yes, in witness thereof, I've here to set my hand and cause the seal of the town of Apex, North Carolina to be affixed this 17th day of April, 2018. So I'll be signing this proclamation. And let's see, Think Apex Day is Saturday the 28th.
That's right.
All right, very good. And I believe Joanna and Karen would like to get a picture. So I will want that.
How you want to?
Just hold it like this.
Got it upside down? No.
Oh.
No, you don't.
There.
Thank
All
you,
right,
Karen.
very good, thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll present this to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jan.
All right, thank you. Presentation number 2. This is David Sarkeesian, NC State Clean Energy Technology Center.
So, hello, my name is David Sarkeesian. I'm a Senior Policy Analyst at the North Carolina Clean Energy Technology Center. I'm here tonight to talk about the distributed energy policies in the town of Apex. Okay, so first a little bit about the center where I work. We're part of NC State University, and we advance a sustainable energy economy through education and demonstration and support. We stay away from advocacy, and one of our most well-known projects is the Database of State Incentives for Renewables and Efficiency, which tracks all the local and state policies for renewable energy and energy efficiency throughout the country. Okay, so we had been requested by Apex to review Apex's wholesale power contracts as well as its local solar policies to determine if there were any changes Apex could make to make it easier for citizens to adopt solar or for the city itself. Okay. So one part of our project was the report, which Drew has, and we have a few copies here if anyone is interested in looking at that tonight. It's got the analysis of power supply contracts and distributed energy policies for the town of Apex. Okay, so I'm going to, in this presentation, summarize a lot of what's in the report, but it's obviously a lot more detailed than what I can present right here. So the first part of the project was looking at the wholesale power contracts that Apex's utility faces to purchase electricity. So Apex has a contract with the North Carolina Eastern Municipal Power Agency through which it buys most of its electricity, and NCEMPA in turn buys its electricity from Duke Energy Progress. And these contracts are what are called full requirements power purchase agreements, which means that outside of certain exceptions, the customer is not allowed to generate its own electricity. Of course, there are some exceptions, and this is how Apex's residents are enabled to have solar systems and distributed energy. Okay, so we looked at a few different categories of opportunities for renewable generation under these wholesale power contracts. For small-scale generation, which is less than 95 kilowatts, and this would be most of your rooftop residential solar. There's no aggregate limit on the amount of solar or the amount of generation from this in these wholesale power contracts. But the relevant limitation is that for every single installation, the utility for Apex has to give notice to Duke and to Duke Energy and to meet their interconnection requirements. And Duke has discretion to allow or deny interconnection requests based on its ability to keep the grid reliable. Right? So then for larger scale generation, and this is bigger than 95 kilowatts, so this is any of your utility scale or community scale energy, the total capacity is limited. Now, Apex isn't really near its cap here, But again, the more relevant limitation is that they can't sell excess power onto the grid as you would with a residential system. And so there's an exception here under the PURPA, which is a federal law that enables some renewable generators to sell power to utilities. Okay, and here's a chart that kind of summarizes the different options. So usually these generation options will let Apex reduce its energy and demand charges that it faces from NCEMPA, which is usually more financially advantageous than it would be to just get paid at wholesale avoided cost wholesale rates. So then, after reviewing these limitations from the wholesale contracts, we took a look at Apex's distributed energy policies and came up with some recommendations that Apex could consider if it wanted to further encourage solar development by residents. So currently, Apex does have a retail rate net metering system for residential solar, and a change that could be made is currently that's limited to a 10 kilowatt system size. And this is probably to stay clear of any possible disallowances from Duke Energy from that interconnection issue mentioned earlier. But Duke Energy allows 20 kilowatt system sizes for net metering for its own customers. So we think it's likely that Apex could up its system size allowance without running into any issues there. Okay, another possible change is that right now Apex only allows customers to net meter if they are on time-of-use tariffs. This isn't necessarily a bad thing as far as the value of the solar to the customer, but some customers may be hesitant to go on time-of-use rates just out of unfamiliarity or just because you don't like the variability. So Apex could consider changing that to allow net metering under standard retail rates, or in the absence of that, just providing education efforts to make customers more familiar with the time of use. Okay. Another possible change is to change the compensation for excess generation. Currently, if customers generate more power during peak times than they can use, before that gets rolled over into the next month, it instead gets used to replace off-peak consumption, which is a lot less valuable to the customer. It's like 26 versus 6 cents. So Apex could change that to just roll over into the next month's on peak. Now we looked at it, and for the average customer with the current normal system sizes, this isn't a huge deal, but if you made that other change to move to a 20 kilowatt system size, it could become more relevant. Right, and then another possible change is to streamline the permitting and interconnection process. I know it's already all available on the website, but it could be presented in a way that allows customers or citizens to get through it more easily, all online and more visually intuitive. And then just to make sure that processes at city offices are coordinated and streamlined so that you can have a minimum turnaround time. Okay, and the last option would be considering a city solar leasing or financing program. So we recently had legislation in North Carolina, the HB 589 pertaining to solar, and that allows third-party companies to have solar leasing plans in the territory of municipal utilities only if the municipal utility itself offers a solar leasing plan. So if Apex were to start its own solar leasing program, then that would allow other financing companies to come in and open up solar leasing as well. Then other options are to consider property assessed clean energy financing or a revolving loan program, which are both options under North Carolina law for municipalities. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation. Any questions? Sure.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. That's a very good presentation, and I appreciate the fact that this could have easily been 2 hours of technical detail, and while some of us would have loved to have a deep dive in the technical field, we have to recognize our role is to stay at 20,000 feet, or at least 100 feet where the windmill is located. But I will ask the town manager, I think this is a good thing if council is acceptable, ask the town manager if he could maybe take some of these items and suggest ways that we can include them practically in some of our both ordinances and policies.
Yes, sir, and I'm going to meet with these gentlemen from NC State, and Mr. Jensen has some ideas that he'd like to discuss with me and them, so we're going to coordinate a meeting. Staff will then develop some policy recommendations to bring to council, kind of a menu of options. The goal we approached the NC State folks with is we want to be, if not the most solar-friendly town, one of the most solar-friendly towns in the state. So that's our goal, and this is a good first step to have someone put a very technical look at our power supply contracts primarily, and then what we're allowed to do under the law. So that's the next steps, Mr. Mayor.
That sounds good. Any questions from council at this point?
Yeah, I had one. So when I was reading through the five recommended, things we can do, some of them seem like no downside, like increasing the size one, but I couldn't tell if there were downsides to other ones. Of those five you mentioned, are there ones that, like, if we did that, I guess the financing one might be, we could lose money or something, but are there other ones that maybe we don't really know about yet that you guys have seen, or?
Well, so I'm not super familiar with how the time of use rates are, how well established that is here. It could potentially be disruptive to, if you're letting people get back off of the time of use rates, because presumably you did that for a reason, and because those are usually more efficient. So, that would be something you'd have to weigh. And then, of course, for the system size, you have to consider the impact on the utility. You'd want to review that and see the financial impact, how that's affecting. I think it's Rodney, the utility, and that there can be issues. As we said, since Duke Energy allows it to go up to 20 kilowatts, you usually don't see any reliability or changes up to that point. That's a good rule of thumb. And then, of course, with Duke Energy, they have discretion for each individual interconnection request, so I can't guarantee up to 20 kilowatt will always be approved, but that's, since they allow it themselves, it seems likely that that's about the cutoff.
Okay, thanks.
I'll do my best not to ask another question, because we will have a meeting, and I don't want to bore the rest of the world.
Well, considering this is the front of the agenda, so we still have things to do tonight.
Yes, and I could ask questions all night, probably, maybe. Thank you. We'll talk later.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Sarkeesian. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
At this time, I'd like to recognize the consent agenda is next on our schedule. Consent agenda items are things that are typically enacted with a single motion and are considered to be non-controversial in nature. However, if a council member wishes to pull something for further discussion later tonight, they certainly may do so. At this time, I'll ask council if there is anything they'd like to pull, or if there is a motion for approval.
Motion to approve.
I'll second. All right, we have a motion and a second to approve the consent. Discussion? All right, not hearing any. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. All right, consent agenda has passed, and we now move to the setting of the regular agenda for the night. At this time, I'll ask the council if there is anything that they would like to alter in the agenda tonight, or if staff have anything that they need us to alter. Okay, not hearing anything, let me see if there's a motion.
Motion to approve?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. Any further discussion? All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. All right, the regular meeting agenda is set for the night. We now move to public forum. This is an opportunity for you to speak to us. We give you a 3-minute time period, so you can come up here. There is a microphone, there is a 3-minute timer, a green light, a yellow light, and we hope we don't need the red light. We have the participation policy, so if you intend to speak, I hope you've become familiar with that. Right now, the clerk is bringing me the sign-up sheet, so when I get that, I will begin calling the first person. Thank you. All right, we have three names tonight on public forum, and I'll first call Andrew Snyder. Also is... Pardon? Okay, I can cross you off? All right. Mr. Snyder has deferred or declined. Thank you. Patrick Kiernan, and then Ismail Said. Patrick Kiernan?
Yeah,
All right.
that's part of the rezoning case.
So, not in, you don't intend to speak during public forum?
Okay, yeah, public hearing 01.
Okay. Let me, all right. Would you like me to transfer your name to public hearing number 1? Okay. All right, how about Ismail Said? Are you here to speak at public forum? Okay, come on up. Which means it's your topic,
All right.
right?
I think I was the head of the representatives. I was here to talk about Pearson Farm.
Is that would be public hearing number 3?
I'm sorry.
All right. So we're 0 for 3 tonight.
I apologize.
That's all right. So Ismail Said? Is that right? Okay. All right. And Mr. Snyder, did you intend to speak at a different event? Or no? Okay. All right. All right. So with that, that leaves no one for public forum. So I'll open and close public forum time. That takes us now to the public hearings. Public hearing number 1, this is a public hearing and possible motion for amending the 2030 land use map regarding rezoning case 18CZ07. And our presentation is by Liz Lofton.
Good evening. So this is land use map amendment and rezoning case 18CZ07. To orientate you to the site, it's generally bound by Eddy Creek Drive and Reunion Creek Parkway. Camden Reunion Park Apartments are to the north and east, and Hope Community Church is to the west. The future 540 corridor is to the south. The 2030 land use map identifies the proposed site as office employment. The applicant is proposing that the 2030 land use map classification be changed to office employment and industrial employment, which would be consistent with the classification of the property to the west, which is striped on the map. The property is currently zoned rural residential. The applicant conducted a neighborhood meeting on January 30th, and they are proposing to rezone to light industrial conditional zoning, which is consistent with the properties to the west and south. A full list of the proposed uses and zoning conditions are included on page 2 and 3 of the staff report. The zoning conditions are consistent with the adjacent properties and zoning conditions. Some of the proposed uses include medical office, office business and professional, health and fitness, kennel, warehousing, and contractor's office and storage yard. Planning staff can recommend approval. The proposed rezoning is reasonable and in the public interest because it will allow for non-residential use within an area that is consistent with the properties to the south and west, and will also encourage compatible development of the property. The planning board reviewed this item at their April 9th meeting and unanimously recommended approval of the rezoning. The applicant and myself are here to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Liz. Let me see if staff have a question for you before you. Any questions for Liz?
I do. I have one.
Okay.
Did you say kennel was an approved use? Is that like an indoor, outdoor kennel?
We no longer have the use classification of outdoor.
Right.
Kennel is inside, which there actually is a facility across the street, which it has indoor facilities, and then it also allows for an outdoor restroom area.
Okay, yeah. Okay. I remember making that change. What's out?
I don't know what's appropriate.
You were gonna make her say it again.
Do they wash their paws?
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions for Liz?
Was the parcel of land that was directly to the north, was that owned by the apartment
So,
complex?
yes, this strip right here is all owned. 42 acres is owned by the apartment complex and is open space on their plans.
All right, thank you, Liz. Is the applicant here to speak on this?
Now it's my turn.
Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Patrick Kiernan with Jones & Canasson Engineering. I'm here on behalf of the applicant Mike Mattachoni of MCI Enterprises. Just a quick thanks to Liz and the rest of the Apex Planning Department for their help with this rezoning of 5513 Eddy Creek Drive. I think Liz pretty much touched on everything I had. If there's one thing I could reiterate, it's just that this is an expansion of the MCI Business Park, so we would really like to keep all the uses and conditions consistent with the rest of the park. Other than that, if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them.
All right, let me see if there are any questions from council for the applicant.
Yeah, I have a question, sorry.
Mhm.
One question guy, but, when I was looking at this, and I was kind of confused by the Eddy Creek Road.
Mhm.
So it looked like the entrance to the business park was on the William Street, but yet there was some kind of quasi-gravelly connection on the other side.
Mhm.
I was wondering what the plans were about connecting that, or to keep it as is, or what?
Yeah, so now that, you know, with the assumption that this parcel will then join the rest of the business park, it actually opens up the possibility to create a new site drive into the park using that existing Eddy Creek Drive and
Okay,
expanding it out.
That's the
Mhm.
intent.
Yes, sir.
And pave it, I guess, and make it more official, I guess?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep, to town standards. Mhm.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Mr. Kiernan.
Thank you.
I don't see any more questions for you. So at this time, I'll open the public hearing, but since Mr. Kiernan was the only one on the list, that there's no one else to speak, so I will now close the public hearing, refer the matter back to council for a possible motion.
I'll make a motion that we approve.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second for approval. Discussion on the motion? All right, I'll call for the vote. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. All right, that passes unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Kiernan. That takes us now to public hearing number 2. Public hearing number 2 is the 18CZ04, possible rezoning for Horton Park PUD amendment. Jeff Roach is going to be speaking tonight on behalf of the applicant. And starting us off is Amanda Bunce.
Good evening. So this is a rezoning for the Horton Park PUD amendment. You can see the boundaries of the area to be rezoned in yellow. As you may recall, the PUD was originally approved in the fall of last year. There was one additional property to the north that was rezoned at that time to LICZ, and that is not included, since it's not officially part of the PUD, it's not included in this PUD amendment. The area totals about 146 acres. The majority of the property is already zoned PUD CZ, and then the 3 parcels to be added in this location here, here, and then at the southwest corner here are zoned rural residential. You can see the surrounding properties are generally rural residential, RA, or light industrial. The proposed zoning is to make all of that area incorporated into the Horton Park PUD. The 2030 land use map designates the majority of the property as medium-density residential, with this portion being office employment, industrial employment, and then high-density multifamily in this location here. The requested PUD amendment is consistent with the 2030 land use map. The applicant conducted a neighborhood meeting on January 24th, and you have that meeting report. As part of this PUD amendment, there are basically 6 categories or 6 changes. And that's what I'll review with you tonight. So as I've already mentioned, there are 3 parcels to be added into POD 6 through 8 of the PUD for a total of 25.79 acres. The applicant is not requesting an increase in the number of residential units. In POD 6, which
Sorry,
is...
Amanda, can you repeat that? They're adding how many acreage and how many units?
They are proposing to add 25.79 acres with no additional residential units proposed.
Okay.
And the numbers per pod are staying the same as well, so they're not shifting number of units between pods within the development either, so that's all staying the same. So within, the second change, within Pod 6, the applicant is requesting the following condition. No more than 25% of the single-family residential units within Pod 6 shall be permitted as zero-entry homes without the 20-inch rise from average grade across the front of the property to the finished floor elevation. All zero-entry homes shall also provide first-floor master bedrooms. Lots permitted as zero-entry shall be noted on the final plat. The third change is the applicant is adding a condition that individual lot driveway access within Pod 5 to the north-south minor collector street shall not be permitted. So essentially all rear-loaded product as far as directly off of the north-south collector street. Change number 4, I've got these in here. The parcels to be added are essentially adopting the buffers that were approved like the surrounding areas within the existing PUD, with one exception. The Colonial Gas Line easement is in this light green area here, and since it's a private easement, when they'd have to have plantable area anyway, the buffer is going to have to be provided completely outside of that easement. So the applicant is requesting a 10-foot type B buffer in this location right here. And then all the other buffers will be consistent with what was already approved with the original Horton Park PUD approval. The next set of amendments are related to the timing of required road improvements. This is somewhat akin to the Friendship Station PUD amendment, road timing clarifications that you reviewed last month. And Russell Dalton is going to come and summarize those changes.
Good evening. As Amanda mentioned, during the Friendship Station discussion, we brought up the new zoning conditions, and those had to do with setting some thresholds in some cases, and also some clarification in other cases, and this is the same here. For the most part, the improvements are the same. As far as the timing, they have set some thresholds, and I'll discuss those in detail so you know what those are now. But this will help us going forward as we work through the subdivision plans. We'll know when to expect certain improvements. One of the problems we run into even today is when PUDs are approved and don't have a lot of clarification on the timing of improvements, and developers and staff get together and we find out that there were certain expectations that don't quite mesh up on both sides. So this helps us avoid conflicts in the future. So first of all, concerning changes, maybe the railroad will stop blowing the horn. Okay. So first of all, we've got, and Amanda, did you? You have the summary on the PowerPoint. Okay. Oh, and this is the same as what I had? It's a different order, or?
It's the same order as in the report.
Oh, okay. So slightly different order than I have here, but I'll go by this one. It's the same information. So first of all, southbound US 1 ramps at Waterford Green Drive. The only improvement there, it's the same as last time, was signal timing adjustments based on the traffic increase. It makes sense that we, of course, don't want that up front. We want to wait for some additional traffic load and take advantage of that signal timing when it's most beneficial. So in this case, this is for 250 dwelling units of single-family and/or townhomes, or building permits for 250 apartment units. So at that 250 dwelling unit or apartment unit threshold, that's when the signal timing adjustments would be performed. And there may be some flexibility on that to a little bit sooner, if we absolutely need to. But it sets a good threshold, so we're not getting those too soon and just having to go back and do those again. Next one is northbound US 1 ramps, Lufkin Road at 1010. The improvement here, same improvement as before. That was to take that single shorter left turn lane and turn that into a dual left turn lane with 400 feet of storage on the off-ramp. This one, again, sets a threshold. The threshold this time is for 180 dwelling units. The applicant can discuss any concerns you may have with not doing that up front prior to the very first plat. but staff felt like this was a reasonable threshold based on their anticipated traffic generation up to that number of units. Next one's Reliance Avenue at 1010 Road. The improvement here is to restripe that eastbound right turn as a through right and provide that additional merge length east of the signalized intersection. The merge length is, what's existing. I think it's around 300 or 350 feet. That would be subject to DOT review to make sure it meets their standards. I think they've already provided some input on that. The applicant can speak to that. Same improvement we had before is recommended. This one would be up front. So this is just clarifying that it is prior to the first final plat for single family or townhomes or first building permit for the apartments. So as far as the timing goes, this doesn't change at all. It's up front prior to that first plat. Next one, Jesse Drive at 1010 Road. We've got a number of improvements there. Westbound left turn, eastbound right turn, northbound right turn, and also a traffic signal. All these improvements are the same. What we've done again is it's everything as far as the turn lane improvements are to be done up front prior to that first final plat or first building permit. As far as the traffic signal goes, we provide some additional language to clarify the need for that traffic signal. We worked with Development Services staff to come up with the best language we could to guarantee that traffic signal to make sure we wouldn't have any issues with that. The way we've worded it is we would collect a bond for that signal if it's not warranted at the time of those lane improvements. That bond would be in place for 5 years, or the last final plat for the development, whichever comes first. Once it is warranted, though, the developer has 12 months to get that designed and installed at that location. As we've discussed before, traffic signals are a little bit different than turn lanes or through lanes. You can't really install those until they're warranted. You can't even really design those until they're warranted. They have to be approved by DOT before we can proceed, and there is some time to get to that point. We can do some early monitoring by checking peak hours to see as we get closer, so we're not surprised by anything with that. But again, we have to provide some time and some mechanism to be able to hold the developer accountable, but yet we have to provide flexibility for when that's warranted. Okay. And just a note with that, the requirement for that developer to install or fund that signal ends after that period. So once the development's, you've got that 5 years or last final plat, whichever comes first. So during that period of time, it's basically saying that once that developer's traffic load is 100% on the roadway, or close to 100% on the roadway, and the traffic signal's still not warranted, then the developer would no longer be responsible at that point. It's just showing that basically development traffic itself didn't warrant that signal. The next one, Smith Road at 1010 Road. This is to extend the existing westbound left turn lane to provide 350 feet of storage, same as before. The threshold for this is when the east-west collector street's constructed and platted to Smith Road. The reason that is the threshold in this case is because that's when traffic would be traveling through that location using that turn lane. Prior to then, you don't have development traffic up there, so it doesn't make a lot of sense for the developer to have to install that up front with the very first plat of development. Next one, Smith Road at Stevenson Road. That's constructing an eastbound left turn with 100 feet of storage. Also monitoring the intersection for installation of all-way stop. And they'll provide for the all-way stop if warranted and permitted by DOT. Again, the threshold is when the east-west collector street connects and when it's platted to Smith Road. That's when traffic would be traveling through there and using that turn lane, and prior to that time, the development would not be impacting that, so it doesn't make sense to get that any sooner than that point. The next one, Smith Road at Dezola Street. This does involve the east-west collector because that's part of it, but it's constructing a southbound right turn with 100 feet of storage and constructing and improving Dezola Street to that major collector street on the 60-foot public right-of-way, and also making sure that existing properties connect in a way that avoids driveways directly accessing it. Because it's a east-west collector street, because we want to use that to serve traffic and don't want to end up with a bunch of traffic calming complaints and surprise residents, we want to make sure we maintain good traffic flow along there without impacting driveways. Next one, East William Street at Straywhite. The requirement here was to monitor and install a traffic signal if warranted and permitted by NCDOT. It's a little bit different than the previous traffic signal we discussed over at 1010 and Jesse Drive. in which case, once Colby Chase Drive is opened through Pemberley, and that's again when the north-south collector, after that's open to traffic, but no later than the final plat for 250 units or building permits for 250 apartment units, they would need to do that warrant study and determine if it is warranted. If it's not warranted after that period ends, then the requirement for the developer to install or fund that is basically non-existent at that point. So the developer is only committing to do it up to that connection, up to that 250 units, and they can discuss any further with you any concerns with that. And then, let's see.
Why is there a short time limit on that, it sounds like? Or am I misunderstanding?
I guess they would have to discuss that with you. I guess what they're saying is that, they're looking at it in terms of their direct traffic impact and don't want to be on the hook for it long-term if it becomes warranted by other traffic that happens to be traveling through that area. So that's one of those things that I think they're just going to have to discuss further with you and defend. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily, it's not something I'm necessarily against, but I can't really argue in favor of that either, if it makes any sense.
What would you suggest?
I think it's reasonable given the fact that it's a recommendation based on their potential traffic impact, and it depends on what the council, what threshold the council thinks is reasonable in that case.
The thing that troubles me is warranting these signals is an accumulation of all the traffic, and each little block of traffic is what adds to the warranting requirement.
Yeah,
so they are adding to the warranting requirement, but maybe they don't make the threshold, and then they get out of the whole deal.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly, I see your point with that. It's a good point to make. I think from the developer's perspective, what they're looking at is their direct traffic impact, and they would argue that, they should only have to pay for what their traffic is impacting and not be held on the hook for a longer period of time for other development that may come in and generate traffic that triggers that warrant that doesn't contribute to it. But again, that's really their argument to make.
I guess the process bothers me a little bit, and the fact that this is adding to what would be warranted. You'd think that if it isn't warranted by the end of a certain period, then they would be still on the hook for a certain percentage of that.
Yeah, and you could, certainly you could ask them.
You can't change the process. I mean, that's the process is already done on this one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we make recommendations based on what we think is development impact. Certainly that process is not perfect, but what we do is we look at the traffic that's generated. If there's a potential for a traffic signal, if they think it's beneficial, they may volunteer that in a traffic study, or we may ask for that requirement. But at the same time, it doesn't guarantee it'll be warranted. So, say you set a longer threshold, and the town or the developer does a study 3 or 4 or 5 years down the road. It doesn't guarantee it's warranted, but it just keeps them on the hook longer.
Okay.
And the Jesse Drive, Site Drive 1, and the North-South Connector Street. This is one of the ones. It's the same improvements. It'll be done up front with that connection when that's constructed. Okay. And as far as the following roadway improvements, these are...
Let me interrupt you.
Yes, sir.
Can you go back one slide when we're talking about Jesse Drive internal?
Yes.
That's the far west part of Jesse Drive coming into this development. Is that the internal part? Look at the map.
Yeah, that's the main... Yeah, do we have...
There's a main north-south connector that goes up, and this connects it to that north-south connector.
Yeah.
When is this due again?
The north-south connector has to be, as my understanding, open and operational at the first plat, so that's why.
So Site Drive 1 would be, at Jesse, would be for the apartments, and then this is the north-south collector.
Yeah. So that's going to be installed within a year or year and a half? Is that what the timeline is? The Jesse Drive extension too?
That's all part of the very first initial improvements that the applicant has committed to, is the north-south collector, and then the improvements extension for where Jesse Drive ends now to that road.
Will be in at the same time. It has to be, otherwise it's a road to nowhere. Okay.
Right.
Before we get too far away from it, Jesse Drive in 1010, that was back a couple. That's the one that basically it says, if a signal is warranted, the developers shall install it within 12 months. A year is a long time to need a light and not get it. I mean, we've seen that with other intersections here, and it's causing some major issues. So is there another way that we can word that maybe after NCDOT approves the light and after it's warranted, can it be installed quicker than a year down the road?
It's possible, yes. There are some steps in there that could be difficult. One of those steps could be if there's property acquisition involved with the signal that's off-site, they have to approach those owners, and it could end up in condemnation if the owners aren't cooperative, but we expect them to negotiate in good faith in those cases. But it could be shortened. You might could go to as little as between 6 to 8 months. It tightens that timeline if there's any complications in there, like utility relocations, for instance, if they're subject to like AT&T not moving fast enough relocating a line, which happens very often these days. You could be sitting there for 6 months just waiting on them. So that's one of the things that's sort of factored into this 12 months. I'd say if you set a shorter timeline, you might have to add some extra language in there to say, with the exception of any utility relocations or other occurrences that are things that are outside the developer's control with that schedule.
I would feel more comfortable with that wording rather than just saying within 12 months.
Okay.
That's my opinion.
I had a follow-up, maybe clarification on that same point. Was that 12-month number one that was you guys negotiated with them, or was that one that was kind of like, that's fine?
That's one I came up with, that I think you can get a signal installed in 12 months, just about anywhere, as long as your geometric improvements are already in place, or well underway. If you start shortening it, those things that are outside of your control start to weigh into that schedule.
Well, I'd agree with Councilman Killingsworth to lower it, but with some language that would be protective of other issues. If that's the will of the council, I'd agree with that.
Well, and my suggestion will be something like as quickly as possible, barring those types of issues like property acquisition, moving lines, and things like that.
Okay.
So that would be my suggestion, to try to get it installed as in a more feasible timeline.
Number.
Yeah, the number.
But we're gonna need a number, but not more than, because as quick as possible isn't enforceable from a zoning condition perspective.
6 to 8 months, no more than 12.
Okay.
That'll be the same as
Yeah,
there,
that's
though.
the same.
6 to 8 months, but barring those other issues, not more than 12. I'm not doing the full language. They can work with it better than I can, but...
Right, because then you run into issues of, if somebody's not going to acquire the property, you can push it off as long as possible by saying things are being held up that way. So I think setting a limit is good, like Councilman Dozier was saying, but that's...
And actually, if there is a problem and we have to get involved with eminent domain, once eminent domain is done, we own the property, basically. And the rest of the negotiation can take place in a courtroom if it has to, or through a negotiator. But at that point, things can move forward. That's my understanding.
Generally.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You have to use that.
Generally.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, a typical wood pole signal design, you're talking about a couple months to design the signal. There's going to be some survey in that, and then that's going to inform the plats that need to be prepared to figure out where your lines are for your right-of-way. Then you would approach the owners with those, and if all goes well, you can get that wrapped up in a couple weeks. So you're talking about probably 3 months on the front end, just getting to the point where the owners can review and negotiate with the appraisal and the proper information in hand. So that's 3 months there, and then you're talking about 3 months left, with the 6 months, talking about 3 months left to basically, bid it, get a signal contractor out there to install and deal with any utility relocations. It's pretty tight, and that's why I'd said 12 months, but I understand we can certainly put language in there to try and speed it up.
You could put 6 months plus time for utility relocation.
You could do that, yeah. Okay.
That would allow for that.
All right, I think, you got the idea, right, Russell?
Yeah, and if we want to move on to the very end, this will go quick, I think. If I can get to it. Okay. The following roadway improvements, we don't need to go through these in too much detail, but all these are the internal streets, so they're not, basically what would happen is when those development pods move forward, when those subdivisions that have those connections move forward, that's when they'd be connected. You can't physically construct those at the first plat if the first plat doesn't involve those connections. So everything's internal, no changes as far as any recommendations or any timing to those. So there's no special thresholds with any of that. And that's the connections along the north-south connector street with DeZola also. The connection of north-south connector with Colby Chase, the same requirements are in there about the opening of the north-south connector, and the Colby Chase Drive extension, holding that, not opening that until the north-south connector is constructed and open to the public. And then also the final thing, this threshold increased slightly. It went from 200 units to 250 units, and the developer can discuss the reason for that, but it increases the number of residential units that can be platted or permitted in Phase 1, this is the residential development restrictions, and requiring that completion of the east-west major collector to Smith Road. But it reduces the number of residential units in Phase 2 from 100 to 50, so it's basically trading off those units as far as the threshold goes. But that's for the east-west major collector, which is the DeZola connection. Okay. Good? All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
All right, let's finish this up. Planning staff can recommend approval of the proposed PUD amendment as proposed by the applicant. The planning board did reviewed this at their April 9th meeting and unanimously recommended approval of the rezoning as proposed by the applicant. They did want to send a note to town council with their recommendation that the town council consider increasing the percentage of single-family homes in Pod 6 permitted to be zero entry from 25% to 50%. The proposed rezoning is consistent with the 2030 land use plan. Excuse me. And the proposed rezoning is reasonable and in the public interest because additional properties are to be incorporated into the PUD while not increasing the number of residential units proposed. And the amendments to the existing PUD clarify the timing of road improvements that were approved in the current zoning, provide more variety in the design of single-family homes, and eliminate individual lot driveways from a section of the north-south collector street. And if you have any additional questions, I'll be glad to answer them for you.
Just a quick observation or question. They're adding 25 acres basically without adding any more houses at this point.
Yes.
But they're adding a lot of wetland down there in that lower southwest corner. That can be used later on for RCA for other housing areas, can it not?
That can be used to help them meet their RCA requirements.
Which will allow them to go higher density elsewhere if they need to, if they wish to. Is that correct?
Not a higher density, no, but it may help them in laying out their lots and achieving the density that is permitted.
Okay, it basically allows for more, in all likelihood, more housing, because a lot of times the maximum number of houses can't be met anyhow on these things when we're putting them together. That's just an observation.
Okay.
The wetland will help add more houses, and that's okay, I guess.
And the applicant is here.
Let me see if there's any more questions for staff before we go to the applicant.
Maybe I'll bring it up now. I had some concern about how long the development was, and I talked to the engineer about a multi-use path at least north of the roundabout on that connector, and I think, the way we left it was, that's my preference, and that I leave it to you guys to kind of work out if that's feasible or not, or recommended or not, and so I think there was some, back and forth about that from Diane, and, do you have any thoughts about, that there's impervious area, problem, you're increasing the impervious area with the multi-use path, and you might be, if there's no driveways, though, you're not disrupting driveways, but, do you have any thoughts, thinking about this area for a multi-use path?
I do not have a professional opinion personally about this. There's different ways of looking at it. I know the applicant has spent some time talking with our transportation planner and the parks planners about that, and especially given the location of the Middle Creek Greenway that's nearby. So I think I'd prefer to let the applicant speak to that.
Amanda, I'm gonna ask you a question before you leave, not so fast. With the original PUD improvement, did we approve a maximum number of units or no? I thought we did.
There is a maximum number of units, but that varies based on whether, there's two pods allow either, townhomes or apartments. Pod 4 allows townhomes or apartments. Pod 5 allows either single family or townhomes. And so the maximum number of units varies.
Right.
But again, those numbers have not changed with this amendment.
Okay, so adding acreage, that would decrease your density, right?
Yes, that's exactly right.
For the maximum allowed number of houses allowed, but it also enables them to add more houses because they're not locked into using good housing developable land for RCA. That's all I pointed out. If you've got wetland, you can use that for RCA. You can't build on wetland anyhow, which allows them to swap back and forth. I just wanted to point that out.
How about if we get the applicant up here? You all right with that?
Yeah.
All right. Sounds good. Mr. Roach, are you representing the applicant tonight?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, Jeff Roach, Peak Engineering and Design. I'm going to spend 30 seconds and I'm going to open up the questions because it sounds like there are a number of them. So, first of all, I want to thank Russell and Amanda, as well as Diane and the rest of staff for working with us to go through this process. This is basically straight in line with what we talked about last fall, going through the process, that we would be coming back at some point and adding additional properties. Some were tied up in litigation, some were tied up with property owners that weren't looking to sell yet. They've come back, and that's why we're adding the 25 acres. Amanda did a great job. We've got about 15 acres here in Pod 6, about 10 acres down here in Pod 8, which is about 7 acres or so of wetlands, and we've got a 1 acre parcel here. Those are the three 25.79 acres. We are not asking to add any additional units to the project. We're actually bringing our density down, as Mr. Moyer pointed out, so it is dropping the density to under 3 units an acre for the residential, townhomes, and single-family combined for pods 6, 7, and 8. I'm sorry, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So I want to make sure that's straight. The second comment was about the 25% of the zero entry. Ms. Killingsworth, we had talked about the zero entry age-targeted homes up there. Planning board actually we didn't have anything to do with it. They asked, Mr. Mead asked about increasing that to 25%.
To 50%.
I'm sorry, to 50%. Our builder is okay with that. Whatever latitude council can provide them would be great. They're okay with 25, they're okay with 50, they're okay with 100. Whatever your feeling is of that number. That's just a number that staff had originally discussed with us was 25%. We agreed to put it in there as a starting point for discussions.
That's 25% at grade entry.
That's correct. Well, and also as part of that, remember, there's also a restriction that it has to be a first floor master. So that it doesn't have zero entry, and then you got your master bedroom upstairs. So it defeats the whole purpose of the age targeting.
Was that pod targeted? Was that in a specific pod?
It is. It's just pod 6 in this area, Mr. Moyer.
So that was my question. Was it going to also be for the townhomes and single family, or?
No, it's just for the single family detached homes located within pod 6. It does not extend south into pod 7 and 8, where the lots and the homes tend to get a little bit bigger, to kind of blend as we move south into Wimberley, Pemberley, Miramont, and then the Marion subdivision to get those larger lots and larger houses south.
Your townhomes will have all the bedrooms up.
Most likely. Typical townhome construction.
Right, but sometimes, you know, that's what, like in Walden, that the complaint was the guest bedroom was down, and then the master was up, which is, so I just wanted to make sure if you do a downstairs bedroom for a townhome, then that should be the master, not like for the grown kids who come home, and then
Okay.
the adult has to keep going up the steps. I have a downstairs master, and I love it, so.
Well, that's why we did it with the single family.
Right.
Because we know that from a townhome standpoint, the width of the lots, from what we've been hearing, is the width of the homes is difficult to put a large enough master downstairs, so they end up going upstairs with the larger masters. So, that's what we're hearing from the builders.
Well, and
Okay.
we'll let the builders decide this,
Oh.
because they gotta sell it
Right.
at some point.
And Ms. Dozier, also remember something else, is one of the restrictions we agreed to Pod 5 will not have any driveways accessing the north-south collector street. So what that does, it puts them out the back, so it provides for different opportunities for the builders as well. So they make it a little bit wider, they make it a little bit deeper, they may have a garage attached on the back. So it provides more opportunity for them as well. So just from a townhome standpoint. Buffers, Russell went through all the clarification, all the intersection improvements. I'm not gonna reiterate them all. If you have a specific question, it's probably easier for me just to answer your question than to try to go through each one of them. And then, the one language that I did want to address was brought up, and Mr. Barron was over there whispering in my ear, in relation to the signal installation at 1010 and Jesse Drive. I think that probably the best language is something along the lines that the developer shall diligently pursue, but not more than 12 months, install the signal. That way it shows that we're moving forward with it. It doesn't put us under a timeline that says you have to have it done in 6 months, which is about impossible to get a design done, permitted through NCDOT, as you guys are seeing now with Beaver Creek, how long it's taking to do this. We can't pre-wire or pre-conduit anymore for the traffic signals. For us, when we do our turn lanes, we love to put conduit in, but we can't. So what happens, we have to come back and do directional drilling and directional boring for those. So it's a little bit more time consuming. The idea is that we are going to push that signal as fast as we can. We've already been on phone calls with the division traffic engineer with NCDOT to confirm about when he's going to be looking, and this is more for Russell as well. Russell, what he's going to be looking for is that the peak hour trips are hit. He's not as concerned about the 4-hour and the 8-hour time windows hitting the warrants, but he has a little bit of flexibility. So, sorry, a little bit engineer talk there, guys. I apologize. So you can ask Russell. I apologize. So really, with that said, I can go through the intersections as questions are asked about individual ones, as there are others questions. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to you guys and just answer questions. Thank you for your time.
Okay, I'll ask the first one. Pod 2 is the apartments, pod, right?
Pod 4 is the apartment site, right in this area. Pod 2 is the blue one here, which is currently set up as TechFlex.
I see numbers on my map that I'm looking at on page 28, and I guess that's not consistent, because
If you're looking at a black and white map,
it's yellow and yellow.
if you look at the one
Yeah,
that's
I'll
full
try to-
color, then you should be able to
What
match
page is
up
that
the
on?
pod numbers.
But, okay. I was just curious, I mean, with the new wetland, is that where you plan to use that as RCA?
Absolutely.
For the
That's
apartment pod?
That's the best place. So, not so much from an apartment pod standpoint, but we're going to use RCA for the entire site. And the best place for RCA is in the stream buffers, in the wetlands.
Oh, I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, so we're not, back to your original question, we're not trying to add additional lots. We've capped our number of units within the apartment site, we've capped our number of units within Pod 3, as you see here in the table. Those are standard densities, those are things that were worked out as well with the last rezoning. Those are not, we're not asking to change any of that. So no, Mr. Jensen, we won't be back saying, we added 8 acres of wetlands here, we'd like to increase our density in the apartment pod because of that.
And I understand what you're saying, and at the same time, what I've seen in the past is asking for a very relatively high density that maybe or maybe not you can't even make. So that's just my feel for the fact that it's an enabler, in actuality, to allow for higher density if you need to, up to your limited cap.
Well, I think with
And
a hundred...
the cap is there, so...
Yeah, I mean, with 175
work with. I was just pointing out, that's...
Okay. Well, with 175 acres, it's hard to design it out because we don't go to that level of detail. At zoning with 175 acres, it's just too
I
big,
understand
so...
that. I'm just saying, that's an opportunity to do different work, pure and simple. All right.
So we've been in discussions about public art, maybe I can get this on the record now, about public art easements, and you guys have talked about, you sent some agreement about two places where they could go, one at the southwest intersection of Jesse Drive and the Collector Road, and then on the roundabout. And so, can that go in some kind of language at this point?
Absolutely, Mr. Gant. So, we had talked about it. The one thing I would say is, let's avoid which corner we pick.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because this location is in flux with planning transportation staff. It may slide west, so we may have to actually have some right-of-way acquisition next door. What I'd like to do is go ahead and go on record and say that we will do the public art easement at the intersection of Jesse and the North-South Collector Street. You know, and we're going to work with Tom Caldwell on the Parks and Recreation Board. I think he's kind of spearheading all the public art, along with Angela Ranke. We'll work with her on that location, and then absolutely, as we had talked about in multiple emails, and we have restriction on what can...
We promise
no statues of David in the middle of the roundabout, but we will provide a public art easement in the middle of the roundabout.
Yeah, great.
So...
All right, so I'm going to jump in there. So, you know, I like to see when neighborhoods honor the history of the people that were there previously. So I hope that whatever public art is there sort of honors the history. And we talked about some of the naming of streets and things like that. So I like to see some of that.
That's great. I like that too.
And Ms. Dozier, we had spoke about that as well. So the name of the property, and Mr. Whitehead can jump in too if I mischaracterize some of the people. The name of the project is actually named after the Horton family. I think Matthew Horton was actually born there in the early 1900s when the family started acquired that land there. So it is named after the Horton family. We had proposed one of the streets to be named Carcilla Avenue, who was Matthew's wife. So we're trying to preserve the nature of the family there. We're looking through who else in the family we can name streets after. The piece here on the south is the Virginia Horton Stewart property, the 1 acre. So we're adding those family pieces as well. The family still owns a number of the parcels here because the original Hortons had 13 kids. And in this area right here, there are actually 13 parcels. There were 13 parcels of land that were about 4 1/4 acre piece. He gave 4 1/4 each of his kids. So it is trying to honor the history of the site. We're actually working with the Horton family, who actually still owns property up here on Smith Road, as different options for entryway and things like that with them as well. So we're trying to honor the family as much as we can. So.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll weigh in one more time. You and I discussed the possibility or the request that the developer install solar photovoltaic systems on the houses at a rate that would provide 0.4 kilowatts per house average, which means every 15 houses would have a 6 kilowatt system, or alternatively every 20 houses would have an 8.
Okay.
Every 25 houses might have a 10.
I will...
So, and
I'm going to punt that one, Mr. Jensen, to Mr. Whitehead. When you guys finish with me, I'll let Mr. Whitehead address your solar questions. He's much more knowledgeable on solar than I am. I try not to get into the houses, so I'm going to pass that one to him, if that's okay with you guys. But I would like to answer any other questions, any technical roadway improvements, signalization questions, things like that.
If he's done, staff did have a suggested wording for the Jesse Drive at 1010 signal.
So, you're good. Yeah, it's based on the conversation you had with Russell. The wording would be, once the signal is warranted, the developer shall install it within 6 months plus time for any delays due to right-of-way acquisition and utility relocation, but not to exceed 12 months.
I like that.
Okay.
I think we can commit to that as, from the applicant's side. I think that's reasonable.
All right, thank you. All right, if there's no other questions for Mr. Roach on the engineering aspect, maybe we can let Mr. Whitehead answer for the houses. Does that sound fair? Okay.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Roach.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council. Thank you for having me this evening. My name is Mike Whitehead. I am the manager of MFW Investments LLC, the driving force behind Horton Park. And primarily my questions do deal with solar, and Mr. Jensen, it is obvious you're solar passionate, and that's commendable. I, however, am not solar passionate, but I am a solar sympathizer, and maybe moving toward the passion side of things. I do want to let you know I did consult as a financial analyst on a proposed $300 million solar facility in 2010 and 11 that never got off the ground, primarily because of the uncertainty of the federal tax credit. There was a limited, I think it was $100 million or some number nationwide for everybody, and it was first come, first serve. And with a $300 million facility needing a $90 million credit to make it work, we couldn't find the investors necessary to drive it. I also like to point out my older son sells solar rooftop systems in Tampa, and he has called on me a number of times to provide specific client financial analysis for unusual situations. For most situations, just drop in the numbers and you see your rates of return and such. But he's had some unique ones that I've helped him with. And I like him selling solar because it's a primary source of income for him, and it helps feed 6 grandchildren that I think a whole lot of. So I do like solar for that reason. I personally received, at my request, a proposal for my personal home in Cary last summer, and didn't think the numbers worked, and my son was also working with me on that to help evaluate. And the numbers for this area are still quite a bit higher than they are in Central Florida. And I think that's probably has to do with the economy of scale and the fact that Florida is a better market for solar. Yes, you know, it's the Sunshine State. That's not named that accidentally. I again received new proposals in January of this year, and though I still opted not to do it, the numbers are improving, and I think you've seen the cost numbers for solar continue to improve over time, and I think there will be a point in time, perhaps not too distant future, where the numbers make so much sense that it will be hard to refute. But in both cases, probably the primary thing driving it, and I think is what we see in the market, is the average family in the Triangle area moves about every 5 or 6 years. Solar, even with a 30% credit up front, requires about a 10-year break-even period. So year at year, you're moving at year 5, year 6. If you got a loan, which a lot of people do, you still got 4 or 5 years left on it. You got to pay that off at closing. So you got to, it's a personal loan, it's usually not a lien against the house. So you got to pay that off at closing. If you just paid it up front, like much fewer people do, then your 5-year investment in solar has been a negative return. One thing that is still, it's not fair, it's not right, but I've talked to several appraisers, and they're still not putting much, if any, value for used solar systems on houses. FHA is doing a better job. They generally have a provision of up to 8% of the total home value could be in solar. And I think that's something that will change over time. I talked to several builders. The demand is just not there. Now, I do think, we talked about the zero entry homes that we proposed in one of the pods, where I think the initial provision was 25%. I think it may be getting bumped to 50. Personally, I don't see a reason to restrict it at all. That age-targeted buyer, and the specific buyer I'm working with, though we're not under contract, we're under evaluation stage, 70% of his buyers are empty nesters paying cash, no mortgage. So they're not planning to move in 5 years, and they don't have a loan to pay off. And I think they're a much better candidate for solar than the typical mom, dad with 3 kids, a dog and a cat, and a job, and he's going to move in 5 years. You know, what I will do is continue to evaluate and consider solar, because I like solar. I was pleased to see that the town is evaluating its policies and procedures as it relates to solar. We did, if you remember on the map there on the landfill, there's about 40 acres of open space at the top of that closed landfill. And we did an evaluation of potential for a solar field there. And on one that size, One, it had to be piped directly back to Duke with the consultants I dealt with, which was problematical because Duke's facilities are at the corner of US 1 and 1010. So if you build a overhead grid system down there, it sort of negates the benefit of that. The second thing was, it's a landfill and you can't punch holes in the ground to mount your solar panels. So you'd have to do it on skids rather than on that. And in our meeting we had with the Department of Environmental Management, they frowned on having such facilities up there. So it ended there. But the point is that I am a solar sympathizer. It's not there yet. I do continue to urge our builders to, rough in the houses for solar. I think the day is coming when people will opt for it. I can pledge to you that I will work with my builder, whoever it turns out to be, and say, you need a solar component. It's not difficult from the builder standpoint, in that you just turn it over to a third-party contractor. Once you have the roof on, they can come out and do it. But the public is uninformed, and the public is unconvinced right now. The typical system cost is anywhere between $20,000, $28,000, depending on how big a system you have. I've seen it all over the place. My first bid last summer was $42,000. My proposal this past January was $29,000 for initial system cost. So it varies, and the numbers generally are coming down. So I cannot commit for a builder that I don't have without me personally underwriting the cost myself. And I don't really want to go out there and say, try to sell them if you can, but if you fail, then I'll write you a check, because I just can't keep writing checks for an unknown amount. But I hear your voice. You're a voice of one in the wilderness right now, perhaps, but keep it up, because the time is coming. And I'm there to try to help promote it. And I hope that there's enough solar in this area in 2 to 3 years that my son has to move up here from Tampa because of the business, and brings those 6 grandchildren with him. So, any questions, sir?
Okay, well, this is your opportunity to help your grandson or your son move up here. What I was asking for, though, is simple as a 6-kilowatt system once every 15 houses, which 2 other developers have already committed to. And we're never going to get people to understand it unless they see some of it. And typically, you can put it on the back side of a house probably 25% of the time, which would be 1 out of every 4 houses. So what I'm asking for in terms of aesthetics is a minimal request. And 6 kilowatts is actually on the low side. That's probably a $15,000 system or something like that.
My house was proposed for 9.3, I think so.
Yeah, so, and the return gets better on the other ones. The thing is, if somebody's buying a house and they recognize that, and I sent you that information, or at least your engineer, they can set aside the money for the 30% tax credit early by just not paying taxes. That gives them a lump of money. They can get into the house. You're saying that people move every 7 years, every five years. I've heard 7
every 5, 6 years on average, yes.
But I saw a study, and I'm surprised that what you said, that it doesn't add that much value, because the study that I saw indicated it does add value, and certainly in 5 or 6 years, the fact that these systems last 25 years guaranteed on the panels, and systems I've seen have lasted 40 years, and that's older technology. The lifetime of the system is quite high, even at the 5-year point.
Yes.
It's
maintenance is very low or non-existent at all as well.
That's correct. So, I think with the proper sales effort from your side and your builder's side, that these things could be at that low density put in. I look at some stuff in California where they're actually putting in SunPower systems on every house in one subdivision. So obviously,
it's a very sunny state as well. So
we're not that far off in terms of total energy per day from Florida.
It's not terrible, right?
No, we're down probably 20% or 15%, so it's still quite high up there, and especially if you look at the reduction in price of these solar PV systems. It should be a sale that you should be able to make, and that's why I sent it at only 0.4 kilowatts per house, so it makes it easy. 1 house in 20 even, as I mentioned, if it's an 8 kilowatt system like you had put in roughly, I think you said 9.
9.3, yeah.
I just think that, especially based on the fact that the other developers small developers have committed to the basic density of .4 kilowatts per house, that would be an easier thing for somebody like you who are developing a large development where you have great opportunities in different areas to do that.
Well, understand, I'm not the builder.
I know you're not the
I'm just a
builder, but you
developer,
have the
and
influence on the builder and the
I sell streets, I sell lots with a street in front of it, so.
And one of the developers is not a builder also who committed to this. So I just think you should be able to commit to something.
Well,
I felt that the 4 kilowatts was a minimal number.
And perhaps those other developers already had their builder in hand and knew what their capabilities and their interest. I don't have my builder in hand yet. I am working with one. I have two others that I'm also prepared to work with, and we're still months away from a definitive agreement. Now, I know I'll be back before this body with some other things. The next time I come, with Horton Park, so the next time I come before this body, I will know who my builder is, and I will have and may bring him with me. And then at that point, based on who it is, then you can hold us over the barrel you may hold us over the barrel tonight, but we can hold us certainly.
I'm going to hold you up to the barrel from my standpoint, frankly.
Yeah, because again, I am a solar sympathizer, but numbers don't work. Again, it's the builders say they lose money on them, and if it's an option, the buyers don't opt for them. So.
Properly sold,
No, I agree.
I know that even with the 30% tax on solar panels coming in to the United States now, it hasn't impacted the sales of these things. I know solar developers or solar installers around here are busy. They're hard to get a hold of.
Yeah, my son told me that the tariffs didn't have any negative effect
They had
at
very
all.
little effect, as it turned out, because the industry is moving ahead, and people are interested in it. So I would expect that you would be able to commit to .4 kilowatts or something tonight. That's my expectation.
Continue.
Can I ask you to clarify, you had mentioned with the, if you're gonna add more of the zero entry houses, that it'd be people that are likely a little older and more willing to get the value out of the solar panels. And so, I'm not sure if your level of commitment is zero or if it's a little bit squishy, but when you say that they're better candidates, have you considered maybe committing to on that small fraction of the houses that are the zero entry ones, having what Councilman Jensen's asking for just that small subsection?
And with that buyer, that's a cash buyer. 70% of those buyers for this current builder that I'm working with are cash buyers. So they're not concerned about taking out a loan to buy a solar system. They're empty nesters. So the next place they're looking to move is Evergreen Memorial, typically. So they're not looking to sell a house in 5 years.
Sounds like they would be a good...
And they hope and they're not planning for that to be 5 years. So it is a better prospect for us. It fits the profile better. So what if we did that in conjunction? If you'll give me a little more latitude there, so that I think I have more buyers that are better qualified for solar and put some number of units, agree to do some number of solar units. Then, I've got something, since my buyer prefers zero entry, I got something said, I hung you out over here, but here's something, here's some offset for it, and you need to balance the two. I'm willing to do that, Mr. Jensen.
You're looking for, 50%?
Well, Jim Mead suggested 50%. Take it to 70%. I mean, what does it matter? Still a good-looking home. You should go over and look at his homes on Bethpage.
Well, that's a big need too, we've heard too, age targeted.
That's where the demographics are going.
If we took it up, that pod up to 70% and then did .4 average within that pod, when is that pod going in? I want to see this.
Well, see, here's another problem is right now there won't be any houses started for construction until likely late 2019. When does the solar credit start phasing out?
It starts
2021?
2020, I think. It might be 2021. It drops down to 26%.
Right, exactly. So,
and then after that, 24%, I believe, and then it drops out to zero at a certain point.
Over 5 years or 6 years or something like that. It's a period of time, It's phased in.
From now, 5 or 6 years,
Yeah.
So, can I jump in? Okay, so you spoke about folks you're targeting that they typically are cash buyers and going to stay for a long
70%.
term. So what about the folks who are older adults who are not paying cash, who have lower incomes? So will there be any affordability for folks? Are you going to figure out how to do that with at least those at zero entry?
No, this is not an opportunity for affordability.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And that's just to be honest about it, your fee structure doesn't allow affordability, land cost doesn't allow affordability, and construction costs don't allow affordability.
I think we could work on that, but thank you for your honesty.
Sure.
I think it sounded like we were in the process of maybe coming up with a condition. Is that where you were?
Kinda sounded like that, didn't it?
So for the pod, sorry, what was the pod number that we were just discussing?
6. Okay.
6. So it sounded like we were coming up with a possible condition for pod 6 only, that you were, it sounded like you were proffering.
Yeah, let me word it this way, then propose it. So
All right.
out of the way you worded, Mr. Jensen, I'm not sure how many it is, but let me go back with the builder would say, I got you this, and it's gonna cost you this, and say, in this pod, out of the first 100 homes, you gotta do, 10 of them gotta be solar. And then...
Yeah, I tried to word it as a density, so that if they wanted to put 8 kilowatts on one room, on one roof, and 4 on another, that gives them the option, is why I selected a density, because it just says, I want to see this density over the total number of houses, and it gives the builder and yourself flexibility, and that's what I was trying to shoot for.
Well, but once you determine to do solar, aren't you gonna do as much as you can?
I tried to set it up or looked at it to say, yeah, oh, I'd love to see that, but it's like you said, not everybody's going to want it.
Yeah.
And I tried to set it up to be flexible for you and your builder so that you could do it and not be taking much of a risk at all, if any. So, you know, if you wanted to say, if you had 100 houses and you wanted to say that 10 of them would be solar, I'd be happy as could be with that.
Yeah, not less than 10.
Not less than 10.
And then this gives me an opportunity to work with the builder and get him through a learning curve.
Yeah, at 6 kilowatts, is that a fair?
I don't know if you need to put it, do you need to put a kilowatt system on it? I mean, the system for my house I looked at was for 95% offset, up to 95% offset. So I looked at another proposal was 55% offset. So.
And I tried to pick 6 kilowatts because that's going to be less than 90% offset. It's going to be ensured that in all likelihood, I don't know many houses, we could say a minimum of 4 kilowatts. How's that? I mean, that's just, I mean, you're never going to want to get down that low anyhow. So 10 houses in 100 at minimum of 4 kilowatts.
Okay.
And I would personally love to see up to, 100% zero entry, if, give you as much flexibility in that pod as possible. That's just my preference.
Sounds like an auction. Got 25, you're 50, got 50 now.
100% entry, 15 houses.
Yeah,
You getting this,
zero
Amanda?
entry.
I think we're at pod 6, 1 out of 10 ratio.
10 out of the first 100.
10 out of the
10,
first
okay,
100.
fine. I said ratio, but 10 out of the first 100. Minimum 4 kilowatt system, because I think that's reasonable. And up to 100% zero entry.
First floor master.
Those are
right.
ranch style
First floor
houses.
master.
Well,
That's the whole point of zero entry, right?
Correct.
It is.
To get the first floor master. Right. And these are single family detached,
Oh.
right?
That's
And
correct.
In pod
if
6.
it's zero entry, then it has the first floor master, that's
Right,
all.
just
You
distinguishing
don't wanna
but from the townhomes,
First floor
those are not part of this equation. All right, so if we'll pause, I want to pause just for 1 second before we add too much new information and see if Amanda, do you need time to write something specific to that? Or did you get the gist of it? Okay, all right, we'll put...
Would you like me to summarize all
Well,
the things that have changed?
I think so. If you want to hang on, we'll do a summary.
We're gonna add more.
When we'll do a summary when we know we're done. Okay, good. Thank you, Mr. Whitehead.
All right, thank you.
Let me just check. Was there anything else from any other council members?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Whitehead.
There's one more thing.
I want to ask
Sorry.
you one more thing. So, I love solar. I think it's a great idea. However, if we start requiring builders, developers to put it on their houses, all that cost is just being passed on to the end user, right? Making the product more expensive at the end. I think giving homeowners choices and building, when you build a house, if you run that conduit up from the electrical box to the roof, it gives them an option in the future, an easy option to put the solar panels up and just run the wires down to their electrical box. Would you be willing to put that conduit in?
I think we'd already agreed to that.
They already
We
agreed.
will pre-plumb the houses or rough them in for solar for 100% of the homes.
100%.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Is it 100%?
Is that?
Did you want more?
I thought we were talking about pod 6 or other pods. What
No,
was-
well, I think now we're talking about 100% of homes.
Does that work for townhomes?
Across the board.
Of homes, for the entire PUD. For single family?
It's single family.
Yeah,
but
not
you
the,
can't-
not the apartments.
Single family detached,
Yeah.
just to be clear. Okay, so we good?
We're good, yeah, thank you. I
Thanks
just
for
want to
bringing that
confirm
up.
that.
Okay,
Thanks.
so we got the clarity there.
It's single family detached, that doesn't include townhomes then.
Right.
And I can kinda understand that and I can kinda not, frankly.
Right.
Because it's a function of, the homeowners association, or whatever you call it with the townhomes. It is more difficult.
Yep.
And I'll let this ride this round, but
We can maybe with planning, talk about what does it mean for solar on a
next buyer beware.
townhome.
Our next developer beware.
All right,
All right.
I think we're good, checking?
Concerned about a gas station. Brett?
Yeah,
Yes, I am.
We had talked
Is
about
there?
the gas station, because we've gotten burned about it, recently, but I think you had said that it likely was not gonna go on the southern part of that pod. If it wasn't one, the gas station was gonna be along Jesse Drive. That was the concern I had. Didn't wanna see, even though it's one of the uses, I didn't wanna see a gas station on that kinda southern part of the pod.
I don't want to see a gas station there either. So.
There's a recent current event that this is related to, so, not to do with you, but the question is there.
I do think with the appropriate buffers at the northern part of the intersection, it was...
You don't want another Malox moment, so.
It was just a concern, I guess, that I shared, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Whitehead.
All right, thank you
We're
all.
good. All right, thank you, Mr. Gant. All right, with that, I think that concludes our presentation, so I'll now open the public hearing. Stephen Rhodes has signed up. Mr. Rhodes, just as a reminder, state your name and address for us, and you'll see the lighting system there for you.
Got it.
All right.
Good evening. My name is Stephen Rhodes, 3208 Colby Chase Drive. Here on behalf of Marion. Just a quick question, and it relates to the traffic study. It looks like there's a 5-year period for the signal there at 1010 and Jesse Drive. And I noticed on the East Williams side, that point, there was up to 250 units. Then there would be the developer would be released out of that. I guess my question is for the 5-year period at 1010 and Jesse, why wouldn't the same be true for that intersection where they'd be entering onto William Street?
Well, just to be clear, this is a public hearing, so you tell us what you think. And
I mean, that's the only, again, I wasn't able to go to the public hearing, so I'm just here tonight.
I understand, I'm just saying, it's not a Q&A.
Right.
But if you want to ask it as a rhetorical question, and then we can see if there's any follow-up, that would be fine.
I'll just leave it at that.
But you still have time remaining in case you have any other
No,
comments.
and again, traffic is the main concern. The big player, the game changer here is the bridge across Jesse. And of course, I know town's working to get to that point, so, anyway.
All right, thank you, Mr. Rhodes. All right, that concludes the sign-ins for the public hearing, so I'll close the public hearing. Before I refer the matter back to council, I typically give the applicant a final opportunity to add any information if they so choose. Based on the possible rhetorical questions, I didn't know if you have any, Mr. Engineer.
Is there a direct question that I can answer? Nothing to add unless you have questions for me.
I don't, but I don't know if the
I guess my
council...
question would be, the Marion homeowners provided us with a nice list of the things they'd like to see, and just making sure that you all keep in touch with them and make sure that you're good neighbors as you're building beside their
Correct.
subdivision, that you address the concern that he mentioned related to transportation, or have someone address that concern.
So in relation to transportation, you're talking about the closing of Colby Chase during construction through the Marion subdivision? Or are you asking about the signal question that Mr. Rose just
Asking
asked?
about his question, but I just want to make sure that document, that all those things that people ask for, that you're making sure that you all are good neighbors as you're building.
Yeah, there's...
And then address his concern.
Yeah, we've talked to, Mr. Whitehead, we're gonna be talking to our contractors to make sure they know Marion is not an access point, it'll be blocked off. And then to address his concern, there's a couple reasons. One is we put the time limit on, for 5 years, on 1010, because that aligns with the DOT widening project for 1010. So we'll have the bond up. If our project within the first 5 years doesn't meet it, then 1010's already under construction for the widening, and we have no control over that intersection anymore. DOT's got it. As for the other end on Stray White, we put a warrant analysis on it, because what we said is that we would work with Russell, that if we add enough traffic coming out of Marion, out of our subdivision down Colby Chase, to warrant a signal there, then we will install it. But at the end of those 250 units, at that point, if there's not enough traffic to warrant a signal there, we have added all of our traffic there already, and there's still not a warrant analysis needed. So what would happen is we would then be on the hook to do a signal for somebody else's traffic that's going to be created by somebody else in the future. That's why there isn't a time frame on the Stray White Avenue signal. Does that make sense, Ms. Dozier? Okay.
Thanks.
So, Mr. Roche, once all your units are added, then they evaluate that intersection? How does that, I don't understand that process.
We're gonna work with Russell. The language actually says that we'll deal with the senior transportation engineer with the town at that point to identify when that intersection shall be studied to see if a signal is warranted. So we're on the hook. I mean, we're looking at both intersections.
So then once that study's completed and it says yes or no, that's when you guys are involved or get out?
That's correct. At that point, we'll start the process for design and installation of signal, or we'll back away with a concurrence from Russell's or whoever the senior traffic engineer is at the time to back away from that intersection. That's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Roach.
Yes, sir.
All right, this time I'd like to ask the council if there's a motion.
Well, can we get the review?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, good point. So if someone is interested in a motion, then, Amanda, could you summarize the new conditions? We don't need to rehash the ones that are printed in our agenda, but...
Exactly.
But the new conditions or the modifications.
Okay, so I recorded 3. The first one is related to the timing of the signal at Jesse Drive in 1010. And the revised wording would be, once the signal is warranted, the developer shall install it within, instead of 12 months, it would say 6 months plus time for any delays due to right-of-way acquisition and utility relocation, but not to exceed 12 months. The second change is that in the condition that's proposed to allow the zero-entry homes within Pod 6, the 25% would change to 100% zero entry. And a condition would be added that 10 houses, 10 houses of the first 100 houses within Pod 6 will have solar installed with a minimum of a 4 kilowatt solar system installed.
Amanda, is that up to 100% or has to be 100% in Pod 6?
Up to 100%.
So
that's a good point.
Okay.
Yes, up to 100%.
Okay.
That is a good clarification, up to 100%.
Great, so we have 3 new conditions.
And, well, that was kind of what, so there's one more. Let me get the exact wording. All single-family homes are to be pre-configured with conduit for a solar energy system.
I heard a condition about public art easement.
Was that a commitment?
Yeah.
Okay.
I thought that was committed before.
Yes, so that was here, public art easement at the intersection of Jesse Drive and the north-south Collector Street.
To honor the history.
And within the roundabout.
With the Statue of David.
Wait, come on. This is getting funny. Okay, so the public art easement, and you did mention honoring the history, which I did hear Mr. Whitehead acknowledge, so, right?
That would be kind of maybe directing the Tom and the staff, or the committee to prioritize that kind of art.
Yeah, I'm not so sure that needs to be in the zoning condition because it's not enforceable.
No, maybe not. I just wanted to see that it was accepted, at least verbally, so that because I'm sure we all, but Mr. Roach, you talked about we're not specifying exactly how, but continuing to honor the family name or names as appropriate and as the state allows you to, when it comes to naming streets.
And the easement would be the town and the developer cooperate. It wouldn't be like us telling them
Right.
it has to be this kind of art. It'd be like a, discussion.
Sure, yep, yep.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. That was
Yeah. That should have been the last one.
5
Yeah,
new conditions.
yes.
All right. Now that the conditions have been read into the record, we can have a simple motion, if there is one.
I'd like to make a motion to approve with conditions as stated.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve this as submitted with the 5 new conditions. Right. All right, any discussion on the motion to approve?
I'd like to start the discussion on that. So I jotted down the things that I appreciate about the project. I appreciate responses to our concerns and our questions, that you will honor the history of the family that was there, that you did listen to us related to first floor masters, that sort of thing, to be in a more green community, and the transportation concerns. The things that I remain concerned about are, some are external to your project, that we just need to catch up in our town with elementary, middle, high schools. The other piece that is a little disappointing to me is, from 2013, I've been carrying the message of the older adults who are in Walden who say they need more downstairs masters, and so their kids are down who are grown, and they're walking upstairs, so a little disappointed about that. And, townhomes.
Okay.
I didn't say townhomes? Okay, thank you. And so then the affordability question, and, well, uniqueness also. One of the things I'm not seeing where it's unique because of the infrastructure you're going to put in place. And by the way, your packet was done very well. Thank you for that. But I don't see the affordability, even a commitment to that in the single family. Because when we talked about, first floor masters and people are typically cash paying folks, then for me, then that part of the neighborhood is not going to be as diverse and inclusive. And so it creates a section of that neighborhood who is not kind of honoring kind of the diversity and inclusivity of the family that owns some of the property and what is a value of mine. So because that section is going to be one type of person who can have the most money and not be on a fixed income, an older adult who wants to stay there and maybe didn't make a lot of money, they won't be able to buy in that one section. So that's a little bit of a problem with me, that that won't be inclusive. So I won't be able to support the project tonight, but I thank you for all that you've tried to do to get it passed.
Any other discussion on the motion?
I would like to also talk to and speak to Ms. Dozier's concerns about, our affordability, because that is a big concern in Wake County, is that we're losing so many affordable housing units, and that number and that gap just keeps getting bigger and bigger, because we're providing housing that these people can't buy, our teachers, our firefighters, our policemen. It's just not feasible to continue going this route, and having these people attempting to live in Wake County, and they can't find places to live. So we do need to find and have a discussion about the most appropriate ways to address affordable housing, and whether that's, reducing floors, or going to apartments and condos. We just need to discuss different options, because what we're doing is not working. It's continuing to increase the gap. So, that's my comment.
Can I add one thing to remind me of? It's in the mixed use is what's attractive to a lot of us, I think, sitting here. But if the folks who are in maybe some of the prospective businesses cannot live there, then that mixed use of live work is not accomplished. If we make it where some sections are really going to be more exclusive, highly exclusive for older adults especially, on fixed incomes.
Any other discussion on the motion? All right, not hearing any, I'll call for the vote. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no.
No.
All right, I counted 4-1. If there's no argument, then that passes 4-1. We now move to public hearing number 3. Before we do, I'd like to see if council would like a 5-minute recess.
Yes, please.
All right, 5-minute recess. We will resume promptly.